Hello and welcome back to episode 16 of Heroic Stats and Any Heroic Podcast. My name is Stephen and I am the 2024 GBHL Rankings Officer and Captain of Any Heroics, where we choose our leader by throwing darts at a dartboard. I'm joined, of course, as always, by Dave and John. Say hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Classic. For those of you unaware, this is a weekly podcast where we cover the Middle-earth strategy battle games events of the last week, with a focus, of course, on the UK meta, as always.
And
Beautiful.
Of course, we are affiliated with Firestorm Games, where you can pick up all your hobby products, models, paints, etc. by clicking down below on our affiliate link. Dave, does something seem off about that intro?
Those of you who are watching this on YouTube may have noticed that this is, in fact, the other Stephen Denbigh, or some might say not Stephen Denbigh at all, because we are currently joined by, how shall I introduce you? A competitive stalwart, experienced gamer of SPG and other systems, card games and whatnot, Matt Light Barnett, sorry, I should say.
Hello, everyone.
Tell us a bit about yourself,
to the podcast.
Well, I mean, I think I'd probably refer to myself as I think hobby stalwart, league stalwart's pretty good. I mean, I'd probably firstly refer to myself as sort of David's, long-term Middle-earth friend at this point. I think I had a sort of, when I started playing this game, Dave, you'd already playing for quite a while, and I sort of sank my teeth into it competitively and was really, really enjoying it during the 2019 season, which was my first full season start to finish. And then I sort of didn't really come back after COVID until sort of about halfway through last year. And there's this really interesting sort of weird, it feels like a generational thing in the league where when I played last time, I knew lots of people who'd been playing a long time, especially in the sort of Nottingham area. And then when I came back after COVID, suddenly the league had quadrupled in size and the sort of faces at every tournament were slightly different and things. And so some people remembered me from 2019, people like you, Dave, who we used to talk about lists quite a lot. And then obviously there'll be a huge swathe of people who had absolutely no idea who I am. And it's really odd, isn't it, going from, and Dave, I suppose, because you've been on this meteoric rise in terms of winning more and more events over that period of time that I'm talking about, going from the stage where people are like, oh, hi, who are you? Do you play many tournaments? And you're like, yeah, I've actually won a few, to suddenly now you're at the stage where everyone, of course, knows who you are if it's anything other than their first or second GBHL tournament.
Yeah.
And it's always strange in communities, isn't it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very strange. It's a real adjustment, to be fair, especially when we do this podcast as well. We talk a lot more about ourselves than we used to, and people, I mean, I guess people who pay attention to the league, particularly last year, probably saw my name quite a lot, but there's also people who specifically know me from this now as well. And I occasionally get messages from people all over the world who want to talk lists, talk shop, want my advice, which is fun. If a little bit overwhelming at times, not seriously, because there's not like hundreds of people. It'll be like a couple of people every so often, but it's fascinating. The whole hobby has grown massively, and as you say, like, I consider you a top competitive player, or I know you don't consider yourself that, but maybe we can adjust your opinion of yourself over the course of this very episode.
Just for clarity, are you talking about Matt or me being top competitive?
Well, one of us is on this podcast for a very specific reason that we'll come to. I mean, there's no point being too coy about it, but we'll keep that in the dark for a little bit.
Yeah.
And yes, we've got a few tournaments to talk about this week. Am I right? Yeah. We have a couple of 90s that we're going to breeze through because there is a top competitive tournament to discuss.
So we're actually going to start with the cream of the crop. We're going to start with the Masters Invitational, which Mr. Matt Light attended and seems to be holding something in the photo. This was a 16-player invitational tournament held at Warhammer World Nottingham. It was organised by the GBHL committee and TO'd by myself and Stephen Denbigh. You can see us there looking very handsome. Most Sporting was won by Mr. Ben Haslam, and Best Painted was won by last year's GBHL newcomer, Mr. Christian Lewis.
Yeah,
got some photos of Chris's. Yeah, unfortunately, Christian didn't do too fantastically in the games, but definitely
it's a lovely looking army. Fantastic an acolyte of Lou Van Heck's school of everything must be non-metallic at all times.
Yeah. And if you like Chris's painting, you can check out more at On The Double on Instagram, and we'll put a link down below.
It's what happens when you move to Belgium. You become obsessed with non-metallic metals. Yes. So if you go back to slides, just to the picture of all of us at the Masters there, John, just real quick, you may notice that the intern and, well, he's behind the thing on my screen, but Stephen is also here. That's because our talented and heroics team were drafted in to serve as the TOs while our heroic league coordinator was off winning GBHL 90s. Spoilers. Also, I can't help but appreciate that this photo, several of us have our eyes closed. I think I have my eyes closed. Ash very clearly has his eyes closed. Jamie has his eyes closed. We're not good at taking photos. That's much.
So what was the format of Masters? How was it set up? How did it work?
So day one was groups where you played a single round robin with everyone in your group, and then day two was Swiss. Everyone was pulled together, and it was Swiss. So in previous years, this has been a knockout style format, which I've said before I personally prefer. I do still think that the knockout format is superior, but you can't always have things your own way in these things. And I think you probably agree with me here, Matt, because I know you love drama.
Yeah, I'm obviously very torn on this, because on one hand, I think a knockout tournament is great. It's cool. It's quite marketable. People who like sports or esports or whatever, they can immediately relate to it as a viewer and as a consumer of content. But on the other hand, I lost a game in round 3 of the tournament, and I would have been eliminated.
That was day one, though. You wouldn't have been eliminated because you would have finished second in your group.
Oh no, true.
So you would still have qualified for top 8, and then it would have been a different path day 2 to the final. But you may still have overcome that.
Yeah, and I think the pots for seeding worked quite well this year, because my reading of the 2023 season in particular was that there were, or it felt like at least there were 4 top players who were the most likely to win on any given Sunday, essentially. And so them being in one pot before the pods were sorted felt quite appropriate. That felt quite nice, and it gave the tournament a bit of sort of gravitas for that reason. And also it adding points of interest and excitement to tournaments makes them inherently more interesting as a spectator and as a participant. So when you've got, before you've even rolled the first dice for board edge at the tournament, you've already had lists having to be submitted that you can look at. You've had the pots being determined. You've then had the pods being determined. You then had the scenarios being determined. So there's lots of buy-in to the tournament. And if you were to run something similar for the Masters next year, you could have at each of those stages an article, or a particular podcast. Say you've got 3 podcasts who are the big 3 podcasts that people are listening to. You could have each of them covering different bits of it as they go and chatting about them, and then everyone, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly.
And that sort of thing.
I do think that there was a real position where we could have, I think the spectacle is underrated. I think as people who are playing, you sort of get focused on how you can win it, whereas I think, as you say, it's pretty nice to, actually think about how exciting it is for people to watch sometimes. I mean, even at the end of day 1 on this, I can't remember who it was now. I think, was it you, John, who made a social media post about
you versus Jakob?
Yeah, the top two in the standings after day 1, and trying to say who's going to win next morning, and that sort of thing gets a lot of engagement. People like it.
A discussion that was kind of had in the committee was, who is Masters for? Is Masters for the players as a reward for doing well, or is it kind of for the community to have a spectacle and see kind of the top players in the country all compete? What do you guys think as players?
I think that my view on it. So my view on it is that it should be for the community, in that you can. It's such a cool thing, and it's going to have lots of inbuilt narratives that you can market that. And I also think when you've got a tournament of that size, that's always going to have a very intimate feeling, the players are going to make it an enjoyable experience for themselves in any event. So as long as they're incentivized to be there to some degree, And making it cool for the community is almost incentive enough in a lot of ways, because it is cool to be in the in crowd playing on the biggest stage with people writing articles about you and stuff. Then and getting your narratives out there. For example, you know, to use myself an example, because I have the most information about my own game. You know, going into the Masters, there were multiple players that I had never beaten and players who'd never beaten me. And when you can draw those stories out as, look at this cool thing that happened. And if you then also get people doing sort of coverage of it who've been around a while or who are good at drawing those stories out, suddenly if Patrick is playing Michael and their game for who's still alive to maybe win the tournament in round 3 goes down to Michael's leader failing a courage test and running away, if when you're talking about that, you can go, but they can say, well, actually, last time we played, that happened to Patrick. And then suddenly you've got this, oh, that's interesting. Everyone can relate to that, from people who are trying to win 100-pointers week in, week out, all the way through to like James and Danny Smith, who are playing on their mum's kitchen table with like cardboard boxes as terrain, because that stuff happens to everyone. It's a universal.
I think the names are actually Dave Clubley and Danny Hawkins. But
no, I think I actually really appreciate that point where you're saying that making it a spectacle for people actually increases the prestige of the thing the whole way down. It makes it exciting to be a part of it, and the quality will be there.
Yeah.
Shall we look at some lists for this?
Yeah, we've waffled long enough. So we're going to cover the top 8 lists. Some will be slightly briefer. Others will spend a bit more time on, just in the interest of not dragging everything on for too long. So 8th place was taken by Mr. Ali King. He brought the White Council and Kingdom of Khazad-dûm. He's got Saruman on horse, Dwarf King with 6 Vault Wardens, 2 Dwarf Warriors with shield, and a Dwarf with shield and banner. Then he's got another Dwarf King with 6 Vault Warden teams, Dwarf Warrior with shield ×2. What do you think of this one?
Yeah. So Vault Warden teams, to be clear, are 2 models per. So that is 32 models total. Front line is D9. He's got 12 spears, 12 big shields. Got Saruman for control. Clearly, interesting list. Lots of strength 4. Grinds pretty well. Doesn't have any strikes. Doesn't really need them, I don't think, because this army isn't built to beat big heroes. This army is built to stall, tarp at big heroes while smashing troops in a long, protracted grind. It's worth noting that Ali, 8th place is Ali King. That means his record was 3-3 in the end. So possibly not what he was hoping for. He's a bit of a top table stalwart over the years. I think he was keen to try and recreate something he ran Ardacon a few years ago at 100 points, where in the days gone by, he ran Saruman on foot, old version of Saruman, who is essentially the current version of Saruman, with 3 dwarf captains with just war bands of dwarves with spear, frontline and then backline spear and shield, like Erebor dwarves back in the old alliances. I think it was just the idea being that it's just a lot of pretty high D models. I think it's hard to do that with a Saruman at the center. So Saruman provides courage, protection. He provides extremely long range commands, technically, with rerolls, which means you can really efficiently use your dice. He's like a 3+. If you're trying to get a model off an objective at the end of the game, you don't even really need to 2 dice it. If you 2 dice it, it's almost guaranteed, because you need a 3 with 2 dice. He's an insane caster, but really this list kind of lacks maybe just an X factor, because if it doesn't grind well, like, I don't really know how you turn it around is the problem.
Yeah, when you look at all the numbers, like you say, Saruman's a very powerful model. He's a very consistent model. But when you actually look at the numbers, there's nothing exceptional anywhere apart from D9, and that's essentially just here's a barrier that you have to get over with your armor. With your army, you need to be able to wound me, whether that's through weight of dice, through pace of play to make sure you actually get the turns, being tough yourself so that you get that time.
Yeah,
it doesn't have huge amounts of might. It's not hugely mobile, etc. So it's almost you have 2 ways that you can leverage a skill advantage, which are your wizard and how well you move your battle line. And that latter point, how well you move your battle line, is going to be a less valuable skill at a tournament like the Masters, where every game is that little bit harder than it would be otherwise. It's not going to be able to carry you through as many games. So it's just it just doesn't really look like it's setting the world on fire, does it? I agree with you.
No, I mean, you didn't have to play this, did you?
No, I didn't know.
So I feel like this is the kind of list that would give your kind of list an awful lot of trouble, just because, it comes down to how many 6x5s you can roll, or 6x4. I think 6x5s in your regular troops, and that's just not a very tasty proposition. And then anytime you do lose a fight, he's winning you on 5s. But I do think that this is a list that's preparing to fight the Dragon Emperor Legion, and is preparing to fight Arnor, and instead it was forced to fight things that it did not want to fight. So things like Black Numenorian lines, like, yes, it goes through them relatively well, but also things like double wraiths, or like charging heroes on cavalry, mounted heroes can use their might, waste their might, because this is a low might list. They can waste their might to just kill a couple of fields, and then suddenly the list starts to feel a bit more gettable.
And what I was saying about the sort of length of tournaments and the Masters is, you made an exceptionally good point there about the Dragon Emperor and about Arnor. If you expect they're going to be the lists that you're playing towards the end of the tournament, then a list like this is fine, because you can leverage that skill advantage against the sort of 3 to 4 random lists you play against in rounds 1 to 4, and then when you get into the real twilight of the event and you are playing those lists, suddenly you're laughing your way all the way to the bank, and you get easier rounds.
Exactly.
So perhaps a bit of a miss for that reason.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on then. 7th place is Ivan Sheehan with Riders of Theoden. He also went 3-3, and his army is Theoden, Armored Horse, Shield, Heavy Armor, and he's leading 4 Riders of Rohan with Throwing Spears, 3 Rohan Royal Guard with Horse and Throwing Spears, and then he has a lot of 1-drop heroes. So he's got Gamling, Horse and Standard, Deowine with Horse. Dernhelm's got Throwing Spears, Elfhelm has Horse, and then he's got 2 captains of Rohan with Heavy Armor and Shield. So this is pretty much like you'd call it a standard hero heavy Riders of Theoden. He's got 15 models, including Merry. I think I've seen Ivan run a sort of troop heavy version of this list quite a bit, but I think for the Masters he opted for a more 1-turn hitting power,
And I think Ivan's currently in his Rohan era, isn't he? He's bringing this to most tournaments, and I think that the thing about a list like this is that it doesn't take a great deal of good fortune for you to randomly monster the tournament with this. It's possible that you get those 3 to 4 good turns at key points over the course of the tournament, and you just obliterate them and have incredibly easy games. And that kind of list, I think, should be very attractive when you know that you're going to be playing hard matchups, because ultimately, if you don't play a lot of shooting, they only have 1 to 2 wizards, and you just charge in and kill 14 models on turn 1 and then win the roll off. Actually, that's how I'd quite like to win the Masters, I think, not have to do too much stressing.
So Ivan said that his best turn, I think it was Divide and Conquer against Ben Haslam, who did not make the top 8, so he was using Pure Iron Hills. I think he said he killed 16 Iron Hills dwarves in 1 turn of death, and it's like that's basically exactly what this list is perfect at. You go in, you go up to strength 5 on most of the heroes apart from Dernhelm. You fight 5. You get 3 heroic combats. 2 guys, every hero is fighting 2, and then you just absolutely chuck your might and just absolutely murder everything. And that's what it's good at against a list that doesn't really have like serious ability to stop you. It's nasty.
Yeah, and the issue this list was always going to have at the Masters, I think, once the lists were revealed, is when you look at some of those top players in that first pod and what they were playing. You and Jakob both have lists that were very good against this, and as did Jay. So when we get to those lists, we can discuss it, because it's not going to be in very much time. But that'd be quite useful. Perhaps when we look at the lists that we're coming to that finished above this, we can actually start pointing out its flaws with specifics, just very briefly.
Exactly, yeah. So the main thing with this is this is something that Ali focused on the shout out Gollum's Gamers, but the Gollum's Gamers podcast preview for it, he was adamant that this could do well, because he essentially said, it'll lose a couple of games, but you could easily podium 4-2. And in fact, no one in this tournament didn't lose a game. Everyone lost a game. So this, you know, conceivably could have come second, even going 4 and 2. In the end, it went 3 and 3, but I think he was maybe a little unlucky. But that's this list. It's basically you're chancing your coin flips over and over, and sometimes that'll just win you events, and that's pretty cool.
Well, as Matt alluded to, our 6th place list is something that did pair up well into Rise of Théoden. So it was Jay Acharya bringing his tried and tested Isengard list. He's brought Lurks, 5 Uruks with crossbows, 6 Uruks with pike, 1 with banner and pike, and then a demolition team with an extra flaming brand. He's got Vrasku leading 6 crossbows, 6 pikes, and then Gorolf leading 2 Urukai warriors with pikes, 2 Orc warriors with spear and a Crabane, and rounding it out, he's got an Isengard assault ballista.
Yeah, so this, for me, okay, first off, Jay went 3 wins, 1 draw and 2 losses, so he's sort of on the upper half of like the middle results, and it still came 6th, which is, you know, that's obviously not a great score for us coming 6th, but that's something about an event like this where you play, you know, you play 6 rounds and only 16 players. This list is something that I think I certainly was anticipating we might see a couple of these. I think there are a few players who have been eyeing this kind of list up a lot at the moment, especially in recent tournament. I mean, Jake Wilson, for example, won a 701 point tournament not so long ago.
There was a danger with this tournament, from my glance at the players involved, that you could have had 5 of these. Because I think
Ben could have taken it.
Christian, Ben could have taken it. Michael could have taken it. Jake could have taken it. Jay could have taken it. So these could have been the Masters of Isengard, basically.
Yeah, and in fact, interesting fact, I mean, the 2 Lothlorien lists, neither of them made the top 8, but both of them were specifically designed to spec well into this. So Blinding Light and lots of strength 3 shooting does really well into this, because it doesn't have Blinding Light. And unless your ballista hits amazingly, that can always ruin games. But if it doesn't, you're D5 Urukai getting horribly outshot by elves with strength 3 bows, and you barely can hit back. I mean, it still goes really pretty well in combat, but suddenly you're forced to move and you can't use your shooting advantage at all, really. I think this is a really good list all round. Like, this is pretty much how I think this list is best built at 700. Like, pretty close to perfect, a version of Isengard. Because you've got the bomb, you've got alerts, you've got who can just lead a lot of guys, make the warbands work, and it means that if you ever do get to go second on your Maelstrom, you can deliver the bomb perfectly to where you want it and be a little scamp. Vrasku, and as always, is excellent profile. Crossbow Urukai warriors are great, and then pikes are just strength 4 pikes, strength 4 5 4 pikes are just so hard to go well into, with even armies that favorably go into this. Like, they just so reliably kill every time they win fights against anything that's D6 or lower, which is most armies. This goes so great into Arnor.
Yeah, and there's so often just a bit of terrain that you've not really thought about, and you've moved up to them, and all of a sudden, instead of fighting a battle line as long as you want it to, suddenly these Urukai are in this little 8 wide block with an extra dice on you everywhere, and exactly, it can be really quite surprising in that respect.
And then when you do get to them, it has two strength 5 fight 5 3 attack heroes that have strike, and then another 2 attack version of the same thing. So Vrasku is an amazing shooter, but it's like when he gets into combat, you're like, no, it's still an Urukai scout captain who has 2 pikes behind him. You know, it's a great list. I like this. I'm not surprised it didn't do better than this, though, because I do think that this was kind of on the brain of everyone writing their list coming into this. So it was bound to run into some things it was going to struggle with, because, as I say, like, I think a couple of the hundreds before this, I think 2 of the last 3 were 700 points, and 2 of them had this as on the podium, like almost exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of lists designed to, sorry, Matt, did you have a last thing to say about this one?
Just finally, 5 of the lists at the Masters had blinding light effects.
Yeah, Shadow Lord or Glacial.
Well, here's a list that didn't, so wasn't thinking about Isengard coming in. It was Mr. Ashley Woolgert with his tried and tested Barn Door, popularised by Dave last year. He's got the Witch King with 3 Might, 3 Will, 2 Fate, and the Crown and Horse. 8 Black Nuns, 8 Morannons with Shield and Spear, and 2 Trackers. Mouth of Sauron with Armoured Horse, 5 Nuns, 3 Morannons with Spear and Shield, 1 Morannon with just a Spear. 5 orc trackers. And he's got Gorbag with a shield and 2 orc trackers. And finally, rounding out is Suladan with armored horse and 2 serpent riders.
Good list, 40 models, very solid. It's not anything surprising to see this. I think this exact configuration of the Witch King for 145 is confusingly good value. Best paired with another caster. I like to run him like that with the Shadowlord at my 800 point list. I run that, the Shadowlord, Suladan, and Shagrat with great effect. For me, the choice, he didn't take the Shadowlord, he went for Malthasaran and Gorbag. And now that is the choice you make if you think Arnor is the bigger problem than Isengard. And he ended up being correct. There was 2 Arnor and only 1 Isengard. Because this version hates crossbows, because crossbows will take away, you've got a lot of Black Numenorians, but if you lose too many of them to crossbows ahead of time, Uruk-hai just walk through you, and then they've got fight 5 heroes who can stop your fight 5 heroes, and the bomb can blow up stuff, and it's just nasty. And the ballista can cause havoc. This goes well into, really well actually, into Arnor. If you get into combat, you've got literally 4 fight 5 grindy strength 4 heroes, which is perfect for dealing with Arnor. What I do think is that was a misread in the sense that Arnor is not the biggest problem. I think that Arnor is the kind of, my personal feeling is Arnor is the kind of, I think you alluded to this earlier actually, Matt, Arnor is the kind of list that does extremely well when you don't have to play 100% of your games against top players. I think Arnor is the kind of list that lets you absolutely envelop and steamroll people using less than optimized lists. And if anyone has thought about it at all, and is particularly in a tournament like this where everyone's trying to win as hard as possible and everyone knows the meta and knows what Arnor can do, I think you're going to find it much more difficult to have a lot of success with it.
It's almost like a very extreme version of what we were talking about with Ali's list, where it's essentially just almost like a stress test for different army lists and things, and it doesn't give you that skill expression above that, which is a big risk at a tournament like the Masters, but also could be a boon, depending on what lists people play.
Well, that's true. I like this list. I think lacking the second compel is a big loss, though. Like, Malthasaran is excellent, and I know why Ash likes him. Ash swears by him, but I do think a Tesco Wraith on horse, 281 for 85 points. Yeah, you lose an attack and you lose the grindy power, but Gorbag actually has quite a lot of grindy power. Suladan has quite a lot of grindy power. If you're not going to take the Shadowlord, I actually think a regular Wraith here, double compel is just too good. Giving that up, not for me.
Well, should we skip our 4th place list and move straight on to a double compel list?
Yeah, let's discuss the Wigster. Last minute, Mr. Jamie Wiggins drafted in, I think it was less than 2 weeks before the event. He had to fill in for someone who pulled out last minute. And he's running Assault on Lothlorien. So that is 56 models. He has Musgur, the heroes he has, Musgur, an Orc Captain, Duzag, Moria Goblin Captain, and Moria Goblin Shaman. He has a smattering of Orc Warriors. I think he has, the important things are he has two Spiders, 2 Bats, no Wild Wargs, 8 Prowlers. I think it was something like 16, 17. No, I think it was like 15 Goblin Bows and then 3 Trackers, something like that. Maybe slightly different.
It looks like 18
4
bows
trackers.
In total, 4 trackers.
Yeah, 4 trackers, 14 Goblins. So without wanting to go into all the nitty-gritty of all the list, it's 58 models and actually a very tough list. Like, I played this in my final round, and it's a brutal list. It has almost everything you want. Like, I think this is close to the best construction of this at 700. I think not without flaw. Like, you can always tweak and make it better, but I do think this hero setup with this rough warband construction with a smattering trackers, mostly Goblin Bows at the front with Orc Spearmen behind. This is really tough. The outnumbering bonus, you've got the Shaman. Basically, you're only missing the Orc Shaman, which I think you probably add going up to 800. The shooting is excellent, and also it has what the tools it needs to go toe to toe. It has basically no part of it is too valuable to lose. Like, you've got your banner, you've got Musgur, who are sort of debatably too valuable in some scenarios, like, leaders and banner VPs. But other than that, the heroes are pretty expendable and don't really have to see combat, which means that it's just outnumbering things by this much, shooting pretty heftily. And I'll be honest, I thought I'd write him off. He was drawn in a group with 2 Honor players, both of whom were within 10 models of P6 grind, and he managed to win one of those games. Finished top of his pool and ended up finishing 4th, despite being the second bottom seed coming into the tournament. So well done to Jamie.
Jamie got close, but not quite close enough. As alluded to in Dave Clubby's fantastic meme, 3rd place was taken away from Jamie by Mr. David Farmer, the competitive legitimacy himself. Run us through your list, Dave.
My list. It's the same as the one from 4 weeks ago in Bath. So Shadow Lord and Horse, 8 trackers, Wild Rider, throwing spears, a basic Green Wraith with 2 additional Might 1 Fate, so that's 7 will, which is the default, 6 Black Numenorians, 6 Brandons with Spear and Shield, 4 Bible Shield, 5 Black Numenorians, 6 Brandons with Spear and Shield, Orc Warrior with Banner and Shield, and then the Spider Queen leading a Bat Swarm. 38 models, Yellow Alliance. This is a very strong list. I said before the tournament, well, I'm not the only person who took this list, spoilers for 2nd place, but it's very powerful, and it has a solid battle line. It has all the tools you could ever need for competing in scenario play. Yeah, just a fantastic army list. 2 casters, double compel.
A list like this, Matt, how do you try and take it apart?
So, if I thought that I were the best player in the room, this is the army list that I would play, because it gives you, it has the raw, as Dave says, it has the raw power and the raw sort of stats on the board to be presenting those very difficult problems for your opponent. You know, I'm not going to go into detail why a Black Numenorian with Moran and Line behind it is so powerful, but it is, obviously. It then also has the wizards to allow you to defeat your opponent by doing clever things. It has free wins in scenarios or close to with the Spider Queen. And then it also has like anti-shooting stuff. It is almost certainly the best list that you can play at 700 points. And I don't think it goes too far to say that. If I thought that if I had to play both Dave and Jakob, possibly even multiple times at the tournament, in the mirror match, that I could win, this is the list I would play. And somewhat humorously, if we go back to the Masters tournament from 2020, which was a single elimination Masters, and I actually played almost exactly this list.
500 points, I think. So sorry? A bit different. 500 points, but a little different.
Yeah, exactly. So similar, had the Spider Queen, had the Shadow Lord, had I think a Tesco Wraith, and Jakob played exactly the same list. And in whatever round we played, he solidly demolished me by playing much better toy soldiers than I did. So I didn't play this for that reason, and I'm confident I would have lost both of the games. But you know, watching Dave play this at the Masters, you get little master classes in how to use all of your stuff quite effectively. And if someone makes a mistake with deployment, movement, any of that sort of stuff, you have the tools to immediately, between the Spider Queen and the Wizards, jump on that, get yourself an advantage by killing a key hero or a number of models that were out of place to get the numbers advantage towards the break. And then all of a sudden you go from having a difficult game or a medium game to an incredibly easy game. And the game I played against Dave was a perfect example of that. We played in round 3. I made a mistake. I put my Dragon Emperor in a position to get him killed. He got killed, and then the game essentially ended about 25 minutes into the round. And that's what this list gives you. It gives you the opportunity to do that without really sacrificing a great deal in terms of might, in terms of numbers, in terms of toughness. So it's kind of all upsides to a list like this.
This list is, the thing I think that is really fantastic about it is it gives you the opportunity to be both proactive and reactive in equal measure, and not that many lists let you do that. Not that many lists have such a punishing reactive play whilst also actually having quite a lot of proactive power. So this is the kind of list where you like to go second, because stuff like Bat Swarms and stuff like Spider Queens are unbelievably good when your opponent has committed everything they can for a turn and you are allowed to come up with the nastiest thing you can think of to punish them. Obviously going first, if your opponent doesn't have strong tools, that's okay. If your opponent also has strong tools, that becomes an extremely cagey match. This list is, especially in a mirror match, by the way, which I did have 2 of at the tournament in a row, it's it's sort of fascinating. So on that point, why don't we have a quick look at second place, because it's the same list with some minor changes. So, okay, it's the same list. Jakob has moved his warbands around. So he's run Black Numenor, a slightly larger warband with his Shadow Lord. He's got a Black Numenorian warband, so 7 Black Nuns, 7 Rannans, and his banner. And he's got his ring weight, he's got the rest of it. His Gorbag has a small tracker and warband, and then the Spider Queen's in the batsform. So essentially, what he's done is rather than having his trackers with the Shadow Lord, he's got his trackers with the Gorbag. Now, basically, the only time this will ever matter is in Maelstrom and Divide and Conquer. But that is just a matter of, that's like an intellectual argument, really. It's not, whether or not that's correct or not is up for debate. And we didn't play at Divide and Conquer. We did play at Come on the Battlefield, and I had the misfortune of having to go first, which in a list like this basically means that you're on the receiving end of the maximum shafting possible, because this list is excellent at punishing. I'm very, very glad that you can no longer compel models to charge you on the turn that they came on the board, because that kind of thing is exactly what this list is good at, and it lets you get your Spider Queen going with literally no comeback at all, which is very annoying. But yeah, that was a tough game. I think I started off with such bad luck on my first few turns that it was really hard to come back. Our previous game, so we played round 4 and round 5. As I alluded to, we were at the top of the standings at the end of day 1. We played a mirror match, Fog of War, which is a hilarious mirror match with this list, because we were both targeting the same things, protecting the same things, and the board being the way it was basically meant there was only like one possible question mark in the air about which piece of terrain I would go for. And it came down to the final combat, where if he'd failed to roll a 6 to win the combat against the Spider Queen, admittedly it was with 7 dice, so good odds. But if he hadn't got the 6 there, I would have won. And
of interest,
did
what
get the 6.
Guys both target and protect?
We targeted the Spider Queen, and that's a good option in Fog of War, because the Spider Queen has D4 and 0 fate, which means that if you land a random tracker shot, you have a 1 in 3 chance of denying points or getting points. Yeah, I mean, that's a logical thing to do. Like, you can target other things, but Gorbag in this matchup, in Fog of War, Gorbag is never getting anywhere dangerous, really, just because it's not worth it, because the possibility is too great. We were both protecting our ring wraiths. Wraith protection is a bit sketchy if you're doing a double wraith matchup, because there's always the chance that they just walk forward and double sap will you, which is a scary thing to try and figure out how to resist, because if you're on like 4 or lower will, like, you could just die even if you successfully resist one of them. So yeah, it's a tough one. Again, Fog of War was extremely close. Basically, no complaints about that. Really close all the way to the end. Come on the Battlefield, Jakob beat me in that one. Come on the Battlefield, I had a few more complaints about, because it started so poorly, and then I didn't get enough luck later in the game to actually remedy it. It was close in the end. I think he won 6-4, but it wasn't. I wasn't really in a good position to take any of the other board quarters, which is sort of the point in that scenario. So it's unfortunate. And then he went on to lose to our good buddy Matt in the final round.
All right. Mr. Libarnet, do you want to take us through your list?
Here's my really boring list. It's incredibly uninspired. I just worked out how many Easterlings I could put in an army and then sort of crack on. So we've got, for the audio listeners, we've got the Dragon Emperor, nice 200 points. We've then, the rest of our heroes are 2 Dragon Knights and a Captain with Shield. We've then got a Cataphract, and then we have about 33 other Easterlings. About 10 of them have Swords and Shield, and the rest have Pikes. One of them has an Honesty Bow, because it doesn't really cost you anything. And pretty hilariously, in the first 4 turns against Jakob, my Honesty Bow managed to kill a tracker, and his trackers didn't manage to kill anything, which got a few raised eyebrows from him, especially after he'd queried whether I was going to try and win Lords of Battle with 1 bowman. So yeah, I mean, the thing about the Dragon Emperor list is we've talked about the Dwarf list and we've talked about the Arnor lists, and the fact that what they essentially do is they present a problem to your opponent's list in the different scenarios, which is either a good number of tough models or lots of pretty darn tough models, but nothing else sort of exciting. And I think when you're looking at the Dragon Emperor lists, they can look like that's what they're doing. They can look like it's simply a big banner and lots of high fight models. But the thing is, it's actually a lot more significant than that. It's absolutely fantastic collection of memeage going on in the background. Basically, the Dragon Emperor list is way more powerful than people actually appreciate that it is, because having a 12-inch banner on your Fight 5 models is insane. You know, no other army list that we've really ever seen has been able to do that, with the exception of the Master of Lake Town with some elves, as far as they'll go for the 6-inch banner. That's probably the best thing otherwise. You then also have the Dragon Knights. The Dragon Knights in the Legion are actually just an insane profile, because they have roughly the same killing output as Glorfindel on foot, which is actually pretty bananas when you consider it.
That's because they're most likely to be within the banner range. Often they'll have 2 pikes behind them as well. So you've got 5 dice to win the fight generally to start with, and then they also get a reroll for the banner, and they get another reroll for the Fighting Eastling Heroes special rule. So essentially 7 dice, and if you're fighting anything lower than Fight 5, they tend to just win.
Yeah, exactly. And then they've got cheeky Blood and Glory as well. So occasionally, if they get onto a captain or a hero, suddenly the game goes from easy to even easier. And then the thing about the list that is incredibly strong is the drum. And because so few players have played with drums, and therefore so few players have played against drums, it's really easy to not realize how many scenarios there are that being able to just, functionally free march every turn is so powerful.
Yeah.
And then when you factor in just putting in a captain, if you're going march drum and you're going 12 and then drumming going 9, you're basically on top of anyone all the time. So I'm not going to go so far as to say it's a bit like having blinding light, but it's so little shooting for your opponent compared to what they're expecting to be able to get, that it almost does a pretty reasonable gap. The Emperor's pretty good at fighting himself as well. You actually don't have hideous numbers when you look at the numbers in this list compared to the other lists. So Dave and Jakob both had 38. Jamie had 58, but he was playing a horde. Ash had about 40. Jay had about 38, 40. Ali had 32. Even the Arnold lists were only up at about 48. And as you've said, the captain with pikes behind him and the Dragon Knights start to even those numbers really, really quickly, which is what happened against Jake.
Importantly, they sort of don't have the ability to do it back, because their equivalent is Arvidui and the 2 captains, and they are only Fight 5. So their actual ability to reliably win and kill is significantly reduced by just weight of dice versus the same fight value.
Exactly.
So unless Arvidui is like striking, which I mean, I don't think he ever would.
And having all of those dice with your Fight 5 pikes, when you look at these top lists that we're looking at, if you look at how this compares to all of the lists that we've played, so against those Mordor Suladan or Mordor Spider Queen lists, you've got all these Fight 5 heroes, and a Fight 5 hero going into 1 or devastatingly 2 guys with 4 additional pikes behind them. Your hero could just die, especially if it's something like Suladan, it's something like the Mouth, something like Gorebag. And then you look at Jay's list. Again, we said these Fight 5 heroes are the strength, and again they're relatively nicely neutralized, etc. So it's all just, you all just match up really nicely. And then when you factor in the march drum for the scenario play, you really do get something where so many of your games you're so favored initially. And I almost think, obviously, that as the memery has shown, there's a lot of sort of, the Dragon Emperor went up by 30 points. It hasn't really had the desired effect. And it hasn't. And I honestly think the Dragon Emperor probably has been more of a problem than people have thought, because it's so easy to misbuild the list. I mean, when you've got these cheap heroes that do so much for you, that allow you to take lots of models and allow you to get lots of Black Dragon upgrades and things, you really lose a lot by adding in something like Brorgir or Rutabi at the incorrect points. Whereas I podiumed a tournament last year at 750 points, back when the Emperor was a bit cheaper, and my list was just 4 Dragon Knights and the Dragon Emperor, and the only scenario I lost or even came close to losing was Assassination against Black Riders, which obviously is almost impossible for me to win. because his assassin is definitely killing whichever Dragon Knight it wants to. So yeah, I mean, and it's like going back to what I was saying about the list that you and Jakob played, Dave. What I want from my list is if I play you or Jakob, I want to have the absolute best chance of being able to just beat you sort of on the cards already, and have you have to do all of that uphill climbing. And I think, I mean, our game was almost embarrassingly bad for me, and probably was why I could go on to win the tournament, was because I played so poorly in it to allow myself to lose the game when I was going into it with such an advantage. Because ultimately, we were playing divide and conquer. I march drummed the majority of my army into the middle of the board. It was basically all set. If I could just keep my Dragon Emperor safe, it was all going to be uphill for Dave, and you're going to have to burn lots of resources, try lots of things to try and get in the game. And then I moved my Dragon Emperor out of position, and you just flash killed him. And because of that, I managed to sort of regain my focus after that. But that's quite kind of.
I was thinking that was a good example of what my list and Jakob's list does so well reactively, and I think that's why it's interesting where objective scenarios are good for it. And I think Lords of Battle was probably one of the worst scenarios on the docket to play, and I think that helps you a lot because essentially you are forcing him to answer the question of what do I do against this proactively, because in a straight fist fight your list probably does more damage. He has to use the Spider Queen carefully, and if he messes it up it's could cause problems because the Spider Queen isn't the kind of, she's a scalpel, she's not a sword. You can't win a straight fist fight with the Spider Queen. You have to trip your opponent first, cause some problems, get your Bat Swarm involved, all that kind of thing. If you rely too much on the Spider Queen by herself, she will let you down.
And in
that's
fact,
like
Jakob's Spider Queen put in a really good performance. I mean, after she was out of might points, it took me 3 turns to kill her. So, you know, really quite helpful. But yeah, I mean, in Lords, you just walk up and then have a bit of a scrap. And the thing is, the things that you have to do to try and even the odds in that matchup are, for Jakob, you have to do a bunch of fighting with the Spider Queen, and the longer that goes on, the more likely she is to just book it. If she does just book it, chances are she might actually just die. You've also got Gorbag. He's not very excited to be doing what he wants to be doing. And then if you're trying to kill the Dragon Knights, which are quite susceptible to magic, if you're just transfixing them, you're sort of just kicking the can down the road. And if you're black darting them, it's not necessarily the most efficient thing to be doing. And what ended up happening was Jakob spent a bunch of might to do that kind of stuff, and his Gorbag died with a bunch of might points to some black dragons and pikes, and then he was down on resources, down on kills, and it was just sort of the slow march to the end. And Jakob's obviously fantastic, and he knows, he knows what's what. So as he could see each of these things going wrong, he sort of sees it slipping away, and he was fantastically good sport about it. But yeah, I mean, basically, it was just a really fantastic event for me on the numbers. I mean, so in my pods was you, Dave, playing Mordor Spider Queen, and then Patrick Divers playing Lothlorien, and then who was the final person in my pod?
Is Ed.
And then Ed with his Fell Beast, exactly. So round 1, it was destroy the supplies against Lothlorien. I get to do exactly as we were describing, where I just run straight up to them, 12-9. He gets 2 turns of shooting, and then he has to step forward over the objectives to not just immediately lose. We have a big fight. It doesn't go well for him. As soon as the Dragon Emperor gets in, he starts beating things up, and it's all just nice and easy. Against Ed, again, I've got 5/5 stuff to his 5/5 stuff. At some point, a Ring Wraith goes down, and then it's basically all over. He has the Spider Queen who just needs to show up, does for a bit, and then doesn't, and then it's over. At Command the Battlefield against you, I get my model flash killed, and then I play Ash Walger in round 4 at Fog, which could be quite tough. That's the weakest scenario pool for the Dragon Emperor always.
Yeah, I was just saying we played Divide and Conquer, but when I saw that matchup, I thought you would struggle to win Fog of War against Ashley's list, because while he does only have fight 5, like 3 of those 4 heroes can strike, and if you never bite off too much than you can chew, they could just kill enough Easterlings to cause a problem for you. And then if the numbers ever go too strong in his favor, eventually your dice advantage goes down, and then everything just falls apart.
Yeah,
I think you played it wrong.
Yeah, and the reality of the charge in with a striking hero and charge in with a 5/5 hero and call a strike to kill 2 models is that when you're considering it from the point of view of the player who is doing it, it feels like a good thing to be doing because it is you making an active decision about how you're spending your resources to try and win the game. But actually, if you charge 2 models with your striking 5/5 hero and you put 4 dice into them and they're putting 6 dice back as the Easterlings, you are odds on to not roll a 6 compared to them rolling a 6. You've got like you've got like a 68% chance to roll a 6, which actually isn't fantastic odds. And it means if you do it with 3 heroes, one of them's losing. And then if they're losing, they're spending a point of might. So let's say you charge in with 3 5/5 heroes, you call 3 strikes, you spend 3 might points, and one of them has to spend an extra might point to win, or God forbid, might have to spend 2. All of a sudden, you're 4 points of might down, you've killed 6 models. That's not ideal. You actually need quite a lot to go right. And if 2 of those heroes need to spend might points, then all of a sudden you've spent 5 might to kill 6 models, and it's just horrendous. So it looks really powerful from the point of view of the player who's like, okay, here's what I think I can do. But when you actually look at it from a numbers point of view, you're not as far ahead as you'd like to be in that situation.
Yeah, I mean,
right. I guess that's Dragon Emperor good confirmed. In the interest of time, should we have a look at our other events? Because I feel like we could debate the micro stuff for a long time. So we had 3 GBHL 90s going on whilst Masters was happening. We're already at close to an hour, so we're just going to rattle through the winners for these. So we had Masters of Fate held in Bangor, Northern Ireland, I believe, ran by Nicky Forsyth. Best painted was Patrick McCormick. Most sporting was Stevie McChrystal. This was a 900-point tournament won by Michael Bunting with Mordor Angmar. This was basically Black Nuns with Gulliver. Patrick McCormick taking Pure Angmar, and Shay Henry taking Fiefdoms and Minas Tirith. Then we also had the Eastern expansion ran by James Palmer. Best painted was taken by Rory Duckett. Most sporting, Andrew Woodford. First place was Thomas Seacombe, taking AOL and Rivendell. This was a Good v Evil tournament, I believe 650. Second was Aaron Pullen with Corsairs and Arnor. And third was David Lambert with Erebor and then Mordor Eastlings. The final 90 of the weekend that we're going to rattle through was a big spring day out held in Bristol. The TO was James Harding. Unfortunately, we couldn't get
the best painted was Chris Bunce, and the most sporting was Christian David.
What?
Oh, Stephen's here.
Like
I've been here for a few minutes. I was just letting you do your thing.
First place was taken by Dewey Evans running Mordor, so that's his Great Beast. Second was Arash Hussein with Corsairs, and third was Aaron Wright.
I've got a few
guys.
I've got a few. Can we go back? I've got a couple of little cheeky shout outs because there's lots of like Matthew Light Barnett, Middle Earth history in these. Firstly, one of the best things about the league is that people call their events really cool stuff, right? Like it's always nice to like look at the event name and be like, oh, nice. But yeah, so in the Eastern expansion in particular, so Thomas, who won the tournament, was actually at the first Middle Earth tournament I ever played, which was Seven Stones back in 2018. Because I was like, oh, maybe I'll go because my pals are going. Didn't know anyone, hadn't really played. And he was looking for a partner. So we just partnered up and played for the weekend. And then Aaron Pullen was, when I played the Masters back in 2020, it had this cool format called like Master and Commander or something. And what happened was you had the Masters, which was single elimination on one day, and the other was like a 1 day 90 where it was doubles, and each of the Masters competitors was paired with a ticket holder for the event to sort of
like just a beginner was the idea, or not necessarily a beginner, but someone who wanted to learn from the, an acolyte, you might say. And
exactly.
Aaron
And so Aaron was my buddy. We played near and far Harad, and then a week or two later, he went and podiumed or came fourth at the.
It was third at the GT, I believe.
Third at the GT at Warhammer World, and that just an absolutely fantastic result. And then when I came back after my sort of COVID hiatus, he beat me at the first tournament we played at. Which was all just like really nice little things. Anyway, sorry, I'm being disruptive, John. You wanted to
it's all right. He wanted to talk about his stats. That's his favourite thing. Congrats to the winners.
Yeah.
all
Yes,
that.
apologies, we can't cover it in more detail, but there's just too much Warhammer being played. So this is the GBHL 100 podium numbers for the year so far. So we've got Mordor taking its rightful place on the throne with 400 podiums, drawing with Isengard with 4 as well, Riders of Theoden on 3, Angmar, Dragon Emperor, and the Spider Queen bringing up kind of the third place on 2 joint.
That can't be correct because the Spider Queen definitely has 3 because I'm responsible for 2 of them.
Yep.
So I think did you not double dip the Masters podiums?
We will fire the current intern and come back with correct stats next week.
Because there were 2 from this weekend and then 1 definitely before because I won bath bubbles with it. Just not to interrupt you, but yes, I believe there should be possibly an extra Mordor as well. I have to double check that.
Yeah, let me have a look. We'll do some stats on the fly. Talk about the other stuff.
Well, there's how about that army of Lake Town, Bjornings, Arnor, Serpent Horde, Goblin Town, Dunlands. Misty Mountains, Varys of Can, Falharad, Grand Army of the South, Halls of Frandor, Swabs of Lake Town, Black Riders, Kingdom of Khazad-dûm, and David's Guard, who will have 1 podium. Amazing.
It's nice to see that there's lots of things that are viable.
Yeah, I mean, that is.
So
I'm not surprised to see Mordor at the top, just because that is the most flexible evil army list. It brings some of the best pieces in the game, the Ring Wraiths and the Black Numenorians, so really not surprising.
Witch King is obviously one of the best costed models in the game.
Yeah, I think very at larger points levels, Mordor is always going to be on the board because.
Yeah, I think the issue was I didn't double dip. I just put in 1 Mordor Spider Queen.
You fool.
Jakob, 90s, let's change the subject. So this is obviously also incorrect because Mordor should be even higher on 10 total podiums. 90 podiums and 100 podiums. Whereas Dark Denizens, that should be kind of up to 4 total as well. But we're starting to see the trends that we saw last year. Mordor doing well, Minas Tirith, Rivendell.
Minas Tirith with pure 90s only. Yeah, that is roughly in line with what I expect, but at the same time, I do still find it surprising that they just don't ever sometimes sneak onto the podium at hundreds. They seem to anyway. I mean, maybe I'll make that my mission. Got 4th of them last year.
There were 2 last year. I think we discussed it this weekend, didn't we, Matt?
Whoops.
Why do we think that is? Do you think there's a particular reason that they struggle to kind of make the jump from?
They just don't have any tricks.
They don't have tricks. They don't ally super well, and so like a pure straight I like to call it missionary Minas Tirith, where you go Boromir, hero, and Madril, and nothing exciting about it. Maybe 1 extra hero, and you just plonk down a bunch of Fountain Court, take as many rangers as you can, a few knights. It's a great list. It's really, really, really solid, but it just doesn't. You could win tournament with it, but it wouldn't necessarily be because you'd have to get lucky to do so.
It's really fair. Everything's really fairly costed, so you end up with a fair number of models with fairly costed heroes that do fair things. When you've got to take some of the models that Dave and I played this past weekend very quickly. Boromir is about 200 points. The Dragon Emperor is about 200 points. They're very different models.
215.
Yeah, exactly. He's 15 more points. He doesn't have the option to dismount and become 7 models. He doesn't have a 12-inch banner. It's all really awkward. Hurin, he's okay. He doesn't have 3 attacks. He's fight 5. He can strike. Again, he's perfectly fairly costed. Your warriors are perfectly fairly costed, whatever flavor they come from, whether on horse, with bows, being bodyguarded. So you're just not giving yourself real advantage to win the tournament. And you don't. I think the really key thing is you don't have access to a really good cheap wizard as well, which would probably be what you need to take you over the edge.
That's kind of why Lothlorien is way better than Rivendell in terms of podiums, is because you have Galadriel leading a lot of very interesting troops with a crazy good alliance matrix, and then Rivendell's just sitting there like, I have some cool stuff, and it's a pretty solid list, but it's just not got the source in the same way.
Yeah, I'm sure you're the same as...
Counter to what you just said, Lothlorien only has 2 podiums and Rivendell has 6. So
at 90s, though, I think if we were talking about 100 podiums, you'd see more more Loth than Riv on average. And I think at the end of the year, I would probably place a small wager on the fact that Lothlorien makes more 100 podiums than Rivendell does.
It's just so easy, isn't it, when you're building, like you say, Dave, when you're building a Lothlorien contingent or army, it just, everything works nicely. Things fit in the warbands. They cost the right amount of things. Whereas I've no doubt that, Dave, you have the same experience as I do when building Rivendell lists, and Stephen in particular, because you've played a lot of Rivendell. So often you build the list and you're just like, oh, okay, none of my warbands are going to work out nicely, and I've got the points for more elves, but I don't have the warband space, or I want to add this in.
You've got a bunch of warband space and no elves, no points to put elves in them.
Yeah, it's all just the word I would use to describe it is just like clunky. A bit like, when you're driving your car around and like the clutch is going or the gearbox is going a bit, and just like when you like do anything with it, there's just some sort of noise, and
it's just awkward, isn't it?
A bit awkward, yeah.
I think the thing I would
Silver Golf.
The intern classic. One thing I would caveat with that is I think as a pure faction or a Green Alliance faction, I think Rivendell is stronger. I just think that in terms of likelihood of putting hundreds, Lothlorien provides more for delightful Yellow Alliance soups, like Galadriel and Gwaihir, best buds for life. But Orthorin, King of the Mountain, because they both mean that Galadriel doesn't have to be the leader of a contest. That's just great. That's just dandy. And also, one more band of elves, having a relatively cheap hero of legend, 130, who is also a wizard, who is also a relatively safe piece to keep. You can keep her safe very easily, and also she leads potential fight 6 pikes. It's like, that's a spicy soup right there.
Right, that's a good look at the stats. Let's move on to everybody's favourite part of the pod, the viewer comments.
Stephen turned up late.
That's the only reason I'm here is for the comments.
Right. Stephen, you better earn your keep then.
I was going to say, I'll let your soft voices relax a little bit more. Matt King 8851, I believe this is the man who runs City of Steel and also City of Kings, previous league coordinator, says, which king of Angbor? Yes.
Yeah,
correct.
That was something that I said in the last.
Danny Stewart says, I'm curious to know whether Akeem's Eastling and Chariot list was using the Evil Enchanted Blades combo, Channeled Enchanted Blades, Cooler at Combat, +1 to wound, and reroll for combat phase impact hits. Don't have a new rulebook, but at the time we wrote a drawn combat article on it. There was nothing explicitly saying that it doesn't work, other than the argument that the target suffers 2 strength 4 hits. There's not necessarily wound rolls being caused by the Chariot. It's a stupid combo, and definitely isn't intended, but that list does look like it's built around it, and I don't know of any ruling that would prevent it if the TO agreed that it's legal. That is something we missed last week, I think. That might be that.
No, I mentioned it in passing, but I didn't go into detail on how it works. And Dan Stewart is that the Drawn Combat blog?
That is Drawn Combat, yeah.
Yeah, Drawn Combat. I was just looking this up. Hang on. So this is the Chariot. Is that right? Would this be under Rules Manual or? Just having a quick look at the FAQs.
So while you look at those, I'll rattle through a few more comments. Beardy Fluffbag says, the fact that the breaking of the Fellowship of the Aragon has a bow model but can't take one is the biggest travesty of MESBG currently.
It's legitimately sickening. I will be writing to my Member of Parliament about it.
That is one of the worst things, apart from the fact that Grimbold doesn't get a horse and neither does Celeborn. Into the West podcast says, I'm really enjoying you guys spreading your coverage to different tournaments around the world, as the global scene is really growing. Personally, I'd love to know the number of players at each of these tournaments, including the GBHL ones. That's a stat we could be putting on as well.
We do sometimes. It depends how good a job the intern does.
Yeah, the only thing is that sometimes if a tournament only gets like 10 people going, we don't want to like call it out.
Put them on blast, like these guys.
Yeah, is that thing. And there's nothing wrong with a tournament that's smaller. It's just we don't want to make anyone feel bad because their tournament is smaller, because every tournament is great and every tournament should be appreciated. It's not about
the size of the tournament, it's how you use it.
It's exactly.
True.
Jimmy QG says there were 42 people. There were 42 people at the Dutch tournament.
We don't want to call people out for the size of tournaments, but we certainly will.
I do apologise because you are almost certainly European, and you almost certainly probably speak
to a nutshell
English better than most people in my country. So I do apologise, Jimmy.
Turns up late, calls out another nationality, leaves.
Just to Who's gone? Just to vaguely mention the chariot thing. There is nothing that I can see in the FAQ. I do remember there was a discussion, and I do remember that there was a sort of vague community feeling that it shouldn't be allowed. That doesn't really basis on anything. I'd have to read all the rules in detail, but I can't do that right now. One thing I did think was amusing was that I didn't realize this, but in the rules, the Candace Chariot's defensive bulwark special rule was originally active, which means if you compelled them, they didn't get the benefit for being on a chariot. That's quite funny. Good thing that was changed in the errata.
That's an interesting fact. So yeah, maybe he was using that combo. Robert Stevens 3847 says, "I'm about to face somebody with 2 Iron Hill chariots. Any advice to counter them? I'm currently using Easterlings. Put terrain on the board."
Yeah, I think I would say Easterlings do lack the tools to deal with chariots easily. Like by far the best thing to deal with regular chariots is magic. Magic just makes them sad, especially if they have 2, because you just get compelled and they run into each other and fall apart.
Yeah, I was going to say with Easterlings, your best bet is to tank the very first hits and then win the roll off. If you don't win the roll, my advice is win the roll off. Essentially,
honestly, if you have, it depends on your build. If you have Dragon Emperor and Brogir, if you plop, sorry, not Brogir, well, maybe also Brogir. If you plop Rutabi, if they're charging you, ideally you want to hit them on a turn when you lose priority. Use your drum, get into position where you're doing a roll off to try and charge them. If you charge them and pin them, if you have Brogir and Shining Blades, there's an absolute treat. The Emperor can just break the chariot extremely easily. And with the non-champions chariots, if you just kill the riders, there's only like 4 of them. The whole thing just dies.
Also, the Emperor can't be knocked prone, so he's an acceptable roadblock. It's not ideal,
except for the fact that 2 charges could quite easily smash the palanquin, which is really not what you want.
Yeah, true.
Right. Oliver H says, "I love the double Cave Drake list. It's such a good model for 150 points. I use this as City of Steel against Stephen. He got the best of me."
This was game 6. Had a lovely game against Oliver where I sat and shot him like a little elven bitch. He had a double Cave Drake list. It was really cool, and I loved it. He had one that was greeny and one that was bluey, and he had a little mini Cave Drake on one of the bases. So thank you, Oliver, for the game. A shout out. It was lovely.
Cool. Our next set of comments, we've got one from Saw Painting Studio. "Rivendell Warriors with shield and sword. Easy, just convert the fine cast spearmen to hold swords. 4 extra poses that way."
It's a bit janky though. I've done it, but it's a bit
can
janky.
Look good. I've seen Spot Whitefoot, obviously Scott can make anything look good because he's an epic hobbyist and painter, but his archers, which all have sword and bow converted out of the spearmen, are very, very nice. What I would say is I still don't like, personally, I don't like the spearmen models. Their heads look like they're squashed for some reason. Something about them just looks awesome.
Cool. Carson Howard, big fan of the pod, says, "I've had us sitting in his watch later section for 2 days waiting to listen while he's at work.
2 days.
Finally gets to listen to it tonight." He says he'd like to run a D&D style MESBG campaign where it's like battle companies and you choose a class from the list and level up like that. The campaign is sort of, hey, you're helping out the Fellowship, but not with the Fellowship, kind of like the War in the North video game. I think that's a very entertaining idea. And running a D&D campaign or a D&D one-shot is actually something that we've talked about in the future with Matthew up above. So maybe watch this space.
There are 2 games. There are 2 systems that you can use to run role-playing games. The first is the One Ring role-playing game system, which is like a Lord of the Rings themed one specifically, and the other one is a port for D&D 5th edition, and each of them has different sort of pros and cons. Anyway, on that bombshell, I'm going to have to duck out because that's all the time that I have.
Thank you for joining us, Matt, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Congratulations again.
Thank you all, and thank you so much for inviting me on.
Stay chittery.
You're more than welcome. Stay chittery, Matt. We'll see you later.
Dave Reed says, "Always happy to help by sending in event details, but can confirm, as someone that works for an internet provider, that other people in Scotland do have internet. Great content as always, guys. Happy to get a list on for the first time this year. Looking forward to seeing your Masters content next week." Well, A, we hoped you enjoyed our Masters content. B, thank you for being our Scottish reporter. And C, I still don't believe you about the internet.
And D, thank you for just being a champion of the hobby. David Reed is...
Missed having him at the Masters. I think I've seen him around before.
Lovely.
I was a bit unfortunate that the Scottish contingent in the end wasn't able to make it, by which I mean Ian McGregor. He was missed, but I think he didn't want to make the trip down by himself, or possibly had other reasons. This I do not know.
Chris Murfitt says we make him blush by calling him one of the greatest Scottish players of all time. You're more than welcome, Chris.
I mean, it's just the truth. If you've been playing for that long and you're still doing well at tournaments, then it's just the truth.
Still winning.
Also, winning most sporting as well consistently. That's another thing.
A few other comments from Chris and David Reed about the Bill tournament. Please read those if you're curious about last week's
Kill Bill
on the Pony Kill Bill special. Thomas Seckham says, hello, Any Heroics. Bonza Fellowship 2, most sporty was Aaron Jones. Shout out to Aaron. Best painted evil was Baradur. Samuel Longshot's not sure of his name. And best painted good was Thomas Seacombe's Rivendell. And the war gear choice was due to the models that he has. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, that made sense. I thought it must have been based on the loadouts, because it was a little bit all over the place.
Shout out, Tom. Nice to see you watch the podcast or listen as well.
And our final comment is from friend of the pod, Dirk, who says, notes from the Dutch tournament, 46 players played 3 rounds, and unfortunately he does confirm that it wasn't Max Verstappen who won. We're still waiting for proof of that. Max and Max Verstappen have not been seen in the same room, so who knows? Dirk's girlfriend appreciates the shout out. She's always welcome. And you can do battle companies on TTS. It's not quite as fun as in person, but it does save travel time. Final note on the D&D, and Dirk DM'd me about this as well. He'd be more than happy to run a few sessions of the One Ring for us online.
We did actually play this, me, Josh, and Elliot, at Into the West last year, which is like one of our first ever. It was our first ever like group outing together, and it was quite fun. We only played the intro scenarios, but yeah, no, it was a good time. I'd be down for sure.
Cool. So thank you to everyone for commenting. We're going to round out the podcast with this fantastic photo that a listener sent in to us of their Minas Morgul display board. We'll put the link in the description below to their Reddit post with kind of more pictures of it. It's incredible and definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, this was
nice.
Someone who's been DMing me a little bit, and I think their name is Tom. I'm not entirely sure. Their YouTube name is like GR Tom or something similar to that. But yeah, absolutely insane work. Suspended Fell Beast lighting. I believe it's got the Frodo and Sam. Yeah, if you just see down in the bottom left corner,
you can see him.
The Frodo and Sam behind the rock. Gorgeous work, absolutely insanity. Yeah, well done. But if that is the last comment / section, then I've joined within the last 20 minutes just to say goodbye. Thanks for watching. Thanks for comment, liking, sharing, subscribing. Remember to support your Hobbit hobby. Go check out Firestorm Games to get all your gaming hobbies, supplies, etc. The QR code on screen or the link down below. Comment down below any display boards you want to send in. Drop me a DM on Facebook or email them over to us at anyheroics@gmail.com. And most of all, stay chittery.
Chitter.
Feel free to ask me about this device if you want to hear all about the Spider Queen. Chitter, chitter, everybody.
Chitter, chitter.
This is, skull-crushingly boring.